The two main negative things that people spoke about when they talked about living in Cornwall as a disabled person were the public transport system and the inaccessible built environment. Negative things about living in Cornwall. Do you go out very much into Cornwall? Outside the Cheshire?
Rarely.
Rarely. And what's it like out there as a disabled person?
Inconvenient.
That's a great word. Inconvenient.
The payments always awkward because they're like a ramp. It was worse in the 1980s and 90s than it is now. I think places and businesses are getting better, but there's still a very long way to go.
Most of the buses down this far aren't accessible. Not in East Cornwall, they're not.
No. Do they have steps to get into the bus?
Yeah.
Is that a barrier for you to get in?
It's a barrier, and it always will be. And I think bus companies should be made aware of that there are going to be more disabled people living on this earth. They have to adapt because things have to change.
Do you find it much easier to get on the train?
Yes, yeah. They cater for you better. They cater for you better than they would on buses, I think.
There's not much in Cornwall. I can't understand why people want to come to Cornwall to live. I can't understand why people want to come here. It's nothing. Got worse.
What do you mean it's got worse?
Places are closing down. Shops are closing.
In the town centres, you mean?
Yeah. And I've been in Cornwall for 49 years and it's changed a lot.
So do you notice if any changes in relation to disability or in disability provision?
I think it got worse. It's got really bad because it's like they don't want to change it. It's got cobbled streets and it's hard to get a chair up down there.
We focused a lot in this interview around the physical built environment, and one of the things I'm particularly interested in at the moment is ideas around disability and isolation or disability and loneliness, and Cornwall has a very dispersed population without many big urban centres. So there must be situations where disabled people find themselves particularly isolated or particularly separated from other groups of people, and for many disabled people who can't then access public transport or can't then particularly get out to go shopping or meet people locally. And do you come across that kind of
Yeah, and very much so in the elderly sort of population that those who cannot get out, and people who increasingly, so in my experience, people who perhaps don't have any family around either because they've moved to Cornwall or they've always lived in Cornwall, but their family are now somewhere else, up country or even overseas, and so they're very isolated because even if they could get out, when they come back, they've got no family around them, so they're very sort of reliant on people around them, and that can be very hard when Cornwall has a changing population, in a place like Wadebridge and other towns where gone are the days when you knew your next door neighbour could be a holiday let, and so if you're an elderly person who's disabled and the house next to you is a holiday let, you don't have a regular neighbour who you can depend upon because they're changing every week, and so what do you do as an isolated disabled person in that environment? It's very hard. to feel any sense of belonging.
What's your observations about Cornwall in general as a disabled person?
Well, if you're one of the lucky people, it's adequate, and if you're not, it's restrictive.
So that's interesting. You say one of the lucky people. What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of people have been used to choosing the preferred power chair, but others do not have that ability available to them.
In your mind, then, lucky people are people who manage to get pieces of modern equipment like wheelchairs, electric wheelchairs.
Yes.
And I guess live in places like this, which are adapted
Yeah.
and accessible. What's your least favourite thing about Cornwall?
It's a bit in its own world. It has a different attitude.
What do you think about the attitude in Cornwall?
It's basically in its own world.
Just our geographical location, we're furthest away from anything else, which I guess it has its advantages, but also when you want to connect with people outside of the county, it does bring home to you the reality of where we are in relation to everyone else.
I know it's happening everywhere, but I think it's happening worse in Cornwall. All the benefit changes, all the council cutbacks. We're always last to know what is happening down here, and I think when it comes from the economic point of view, I think we're all worst hit down in Cornwall than we perhaps I would be if I was somewhere else in England.
It's changing too much. I can't talk, but people are coming down from out country and changing it and trying to make it into something different.
You use a walker now to get around. So how does that impact on your daily life in terms of getting into and out of places and on and off things?
It's very hard.
Okay.
And I don't use public transport, obviously.
No public
Because
transport.
even if I could get on the bus, I'd have to get to the bus stop, and then when I got off the bus, I'd have to walk to wherever I was going. So the amount of energy in those actions as well is not feasible. So I just drive, really.
Mm. When we spoke earlier, you were talking about getting from the east of the county to the west of the county on public transport, and how difficult that was.
I can't do it. To come here today, I've had to go and stay at Slides for 3 or 4 days because I can't drive that far anymore. Because I'm not working anymore, I don't get access to work support, so I can't pay for a driver. So actually, when you stop work, you really are in a bit of a difficult dilemma because you don't get that automatic support to get around.
Participants: Richard Mark Osborne, Pete Ski, Ian MacArthur, Lorna Richards, Reverend Don Whitting and Dr Claire Tregaskis. Interviewers: Dr Theo Blackmore and Dean Inwood. Transcriber: JHTS Transcription Services. Subtitles: Azook Community Interest Company. Disability Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. Empower, Assist, Facilitate. Supported by the National Lottery through the Heritage Lottery Fund. All interviews recorded in 2013. For more information about the project, please email theo@disabilitycornwall.org.uk.